My name is Frank Butler. I am a retired Navy doctor. This is a fascinating story. In 1992, when we started looking into this from the perspective of the Navy SEAL Medical Research Program, I realized that as an ophthalmologist and a Navy diving medical officer that I had no training in trauma care. So I went to the Advanced Trauma Life Support course and got myself qualified as a trauma instructor. And in that capacity, I traveled around to different bases and I trained doctors and medics and corpsmen in PHTLS, as the course is abbreviated. And one of the key things that we taught in that course was not to use tourniquets. They were considered to be a last resort because the potential for ischemic damage to the arm or leg was so great that in using the tourniquet, you were likely to sacrifice the extremity. And so that was the teaching, and I taught that. And then I started to read about the Vietnam War, and I read papers by Colonel Ron Bellamy, where he documented that bleeding to death from wounds of the arm or leg was one of the leading causes of preventable death in Vietnam. And another surgeon, in agreement with that, found that in a cohort of about 2,600 fatalities, not casualties, but fatalities, 7% of those fatalities bled to death from arm or leg wounds. And if you consider that multiplied by the entirety of our casualties in Vietnam, that's over 3,400 people that died because we didn't use a tourniquet on them. And that's a staggering number. That's more than the people who were killed at Pearl Harbor, more than people who were killed at 9/11. That was in my mind as I started to do the background research for this project. And then something, just an amazing turn of events. I hurt my knee running with my sons on a family vacation to Fripp Island in South Carolina. So I had to have my knee operated on, and I went into the OR, and after they started an IV, the next thing that they did was to put a tourniquet on my leg. I tried to get up and say, hey, you shouldn't be using a tourniquet. And they realized that I was being disruptive, gave me some more medicine. I relaxed a little bit for the surgery. But the next day when I went back to see the orthopedic surgeon, I said, hey, Jeff, when you guys operated on me, you used a tourniquet on my leg. When we train medics and corpsmen, we train them never to use tourniquets because of the risk of ischemic damage to the leg and the extremity having to be amputated. And the orthopedic surgeon said, hey, Frank, what can I tell you? We use these tourniquets in the operating room every day. They don't cause problems, and nobody's leg has to be amputated. In TC3 in 1996, we recommended that everybody carry a tourniquet and that they were very safe for use for up to an hour. Between 1996 and 2001, there was a lot of talk about TC3, but only a few units like the Army Rangers, the 75th Ranger Regiment, the Navy SEALs, the Air Force Pararescue Community, and the Army's Special Missions Unit. Only a few people adopted Tactical Combat Casualty Care and tourniquets. So when the U.S. military went to war in Afghanistan, most people did not have tourniquets, and as a result, a lot of people bled to death when they could have been saved with a $20 device that could be applied in seconds. So that was a terrible thing, and as we began to document this loss of life that was, again, very preventable, more and more people followed into tourniquets and then adopted TC3 as an entirety. And so tourniquets were remarkable in that they saved thousands of lives in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they were perhaps the signature improvement in pre-hospital trauma care in Iraq and Afghanistan. Colonel Brian Eastridge wrote a paper that looked at all of the fatalities that we had in those two wars up till 2011, and over 100 Americans bled to death from arm or leg wounds. And if you think of that as being somebody that you love, I mean, that's a staggering number and totally unacceptable. And so it's doing a lot of good, but it's terrible that we had to learn in such a painful way. So the term tourniquet conversion refers to taking off the tourniquet and controlling the bleeding through other methodologies. Like we have other things that can stop bleeding, like hemostatic dressings, like a substance called Xstat, and other things that can help to stop bleeding. If you leave the tourniquet on the leg long enough, the leg will be damaged. And in Iraq and Afghanistan, because our evacuation time was so short, usually an hour or certainly not often more than 2 hours, what was happening is that we're getting the tourniquets off in time that there was no damage done to the leg from the tourniquet. To the best of our knowledge, no American service member lost a leg to tourniquet ischemia in Iraq and Afghanistan. So they were incredibly successful. There was one incident that happened in a theater away from Iraq and Afghanistan where a U.S. service member had a tourniquet applied and it was left on the leg for 8 hours. And that service member lost that leg because of tourniquet damage. That one incident made us realize that we needed to go back and emphasize that even more. So Colonel Stacy Shackelford, who was a member of the Committee on Tactical Combat Casualty Care, wrote what I think is just a superb paper published in, I think, 2014 that relooked at tourniquet use and tourniquet conversion. And her recommendation, which was adopted by the committee, was it is mandatory to go back and try to take the tourniquet off if it's been on for 2 hours. It's good to try to take it off before then, but it's mandatory at 2 hours. And that has been in the TC3 guidelines now for over 10 years. By 2008, it's fair to say that every American on the battlefield had a tourniquet and was trained on how to use it. And we were losing almost no lives to extremity hemorrhage. In 2014, there was a paper published by Dr. Tress Goodwin at the Uniformed Services University that looked at tourniquet use in the civilian sector. So you might have thought that because the military was doing so well with tourniquets, that it would instantly transition to the civilian sector. That absolutely was not the case. And Dr. Goodwin in her paper looked at all of the EMS activations for 2008 and 2009. And in over 4 million activations, the number of tourniquet uses was exactly 0. So there were pockets of tourniquet use, but in most places they weren't used at all. And then after the Sandy Hook shooting, just a terrible mass casualty event, the governor of Connecticut asked Connecticut trauma surgeon Lynn Jacobs to come in, take a look at the autopsies and see what we could do to prevent loss of lives from mass shooter events in the future. And Dr. Jacobs looked at those autopsies, and tragically, most of those kids could not have been saved with tourniquets. But Dr. Jacobs looked at the military experience and thought about that and realized that control of external hemorrhage with tourniquets and hemostatic dressings could absolutely save lives with very little risk to the trauma victim and minimal expense to the American medical system. He understood the power of group dynamics. He gathered a group of people together, medical leaders from the FBI, the American College of Surgeons, some of our SWAT team advisors, and he brought them together in Hartford to talk about this and to try to formulate a plan of action. And that became known as the Hartford Consensus. And what this group did was to obtain American College of Surgeons support and then later White House support for the incredibly successful interventions that the military had pioneered. The Hartford Consensus effort gave birth to the American College of Surgeons and White House supported Stop the Bleed campaign. So this was just a remarkable example of the civilian sector, led by Dr. Jacobs, taking the concepts pioneered by Tactical Combat Casualty Care and transitioning those to the civilian sector. And it was dramatically successful. We've saved many, many, many thousands of lives in the civilian sector. The Stop the Bleed effort realized something that Tactical Combat Casualty Care had realized, which was that A, it doesn't take a lot of skill to apply a tourniquet correctly, and B, you don't have very long to apply a tourniquet, and C, if you don't get it done very quickly, the person with the arterial bleeding from their leg is likely to bleed to death before 911 gets there. So if you're a police officer and you're involved in a shooting and say you have to shoot a suspect or say a civilian bystander is hit in the gunfire, police officers can and now do carry tourniquets. The TC3 book, and in PHTLS Military 10th edition, we describe how tactical law enforcement was using the concepts of tactical combat casualty care well before most EMS systems in the US. And it's because their members are potentially exposed to gunfire on a regular basis, and they have to know how to deal with the aftermath of that. So take that a step further. I am a bicycle rider, and when I go out on my bike rides, my emergency kit is a tourniquet and a cell phone. I'm prepared to stop any hemorrhage that I might have from a bicycle accident, and I've had a couple. And I'm also prepared to save somebody else. If I come across somebody that's been in an automobile accident, I can apply a tourniquet and save that person's life. So you need a tourniquet and somebody that knows how to apply it anytime that you're in a high-risk situation. Think of hunters, think of scuba divers, think of Formula One racing. Anytime there's a potential for significant trauma, there's a potential need for a tourniquet. And if you have a tourniquet, you need to have somebody who's trained to use it. And that's why Stop the Bleed has been such a powerful program. It has trained Americans across the country, not just doctors, not just medics, but everybody, hopefully, to use tourniquets when it's appropriate. The military has made the decision to use TC3. So I think if you're a military EMS director, it's absolutely imperative that you read PHTLS 10 so that you can understand why you're using pre-hospital whole blood, why you're using combat gauze, why you're using interosseous access device, which IO access device should I use, which tourniquet should I use. All of those things are critical. In the civilian level or in the civilian sector, you have EMT basic, advanced, and then paramedics. Anyone who is a medical director who provides instruction for those medics has to know about TC3 That doesn't mean that every civilian sector has to adopt everything in TC3 at all, but they absolutely should look at it and say, yes, I'm going to do this, or no, I'm not going to do this. It's in the military, we have adopted TC3 as an entirety, as a single body of knowledge and a single set of recommendations. It's different in the civilian sector. In that environment, each EMS system makes its own decision about each life-saving intervention. So you could have an EMS system, and there's many systems like this that currently use tourniquets but don't use pre-hospital whole blood. So yeah, I mean, this is something that's been very successful in the military. If you are a civilian medical director, it seems to me that it would be imperative for you to be able to make an informed decision, that you have read the military experience and can say yes or no based on your thorough reading of what's in PHTLS 10 military.